Hello and welcome to episode 6 of Belpod, the podcast dedicated to Belarusian football. И привет еще раз нашим слушателям в Беларуси. We'll be focusing today on what we've made of the first two rounds of the league campaign, the successes and the failures, the ones to watch and the ones to worry about. We'll then hear from the undisputed king of English language commentary on the BPL, as Motty's Mike joins Dan in the latest of our interviews. And we'll round off with our take on what might come to pass in the national team's forthcoming World Cup 2022 qualifying fixtures. Hello again, John, and after 5 episodes, we finally have some league football to talk about. 2 weeks of league football. What have been your initial impressions?
Yeah, it's great, Liam, isn't it? The season started, finally, we're underway. I think there haven't been too many classics in the first fortnight, if we're honest. A few things have played a part in that. Terrible weather, having to play in small AstroTurf stadiums that the players aren't maybe very familiar with. But I think the season's panning out much as we envisaged it so far, don't you think?
Yeah, very much so. I think that we've seen from what people have said to us in the polls that we've conducted that there's a split opinion, really, isn't there? There's obviously Shakhtar are generally the favourites. More people think they're going to win the league again this season than anyone else. But it does feel like there's still a lot of teams that have a chance, but none of them have completely staked a serious claim to derail their particular bid to win 2 in a row.
I think you're right. And I think the two games I've enjoyed the most were Dinamo turning over Torpedo 3-0 on the first weekend. And I think that was a really impressive performance, and it sent a real message to the rest of the league as to what Dinamo were capable of. But the games I enjoyed most this weekend were down the table a bit. You know, I thought Sliutsk Neyman was a really, really good game. Two good sides going at it full throttle and not scared of making a mistake. Just as well for goalkeeper Kulganski then of Neyman. And the Gommel Derby, which was maybe spoiled a bit by a very soft penalty, but overall I enjoyed the game very much in my first proper look at Gommel, who've just come up, of course.
No, I think it's notable, isn't it, that having started so well, Dinamo, and we've obviously bigged them up in terms of the title chances.
Yeah.
We kind of felt like they took a fairly big backward step, and it was back to the bad old Kuchuk of last year, wasn't it, this weekend at Vitebsk?
That's one of the worst games I've seen in a long time. Absolutely horrendous. Two sides more frightened to lose the game than they were to go and win it. It should have been clear to Kuchuk from Viteb's first game at Neyman that Vitebsk have very little going forward, that Evgeny Chernyukin's still on the lookout for a striker. But they played as though Viteb still had Nicolaescu up front. Really conservative tactics and incoherent in terms of attacking, I thought. I mean, so often you had Vladislav Klimovic on his own up front, surrounded by 4 blue shirts and not another attacker within 20 yards of him. So for those who are Dinamo-minded, that must have been a really frustrating performance, as you say. But then again, Liam, Shakhtar haven't been great either, have they, to begin with?
No, I think they've just done enough in both games, haven't they? Late winner against FC Minsk, and I felt against Energetic. I felt they were quite fortunate to be 2-0 up at half time. Energetic got a goal back early in the second half, and I felt definitely deserved to draw out of that game at the very least. But I suppose that's the difference. Maybe that's what we always talk about title winning sides. That's what they do, don't they? They win ugly. And I felt that Dinamo Minsk had to win ugly, really, at Vitebsk. I know the weather conditions again were very poor. There's been quite a few windy games as well as snow, hasn't there? It's been difficult for them, but I still felt there was a lack of ambition there and a sense of, exactly as you say, Klimovic miles away from everybody else, Kislyak playing too deep. It just felt like they'd come for the draw, which is extraordinary. Having really made a statement the previous week, it felt like they really didn't want to win the game. A team that did want to win the game, another one of our title contenders, Rook, and they haven't won a game yet, Rook, have they? And certainly last weekend, they must have been absolutely kicking themselves. I still can't quite work out how they didn't win that game at FC Minsk.
Yeah, that was a horrendous collapse in the last 10 minutes. And I think you wrote on Twitter that they paid the price for complacency. And you're absolutely right in that judgment. Look, it was a very odd game. Both games featuring FC Minsk have been very odd. And it's clear that Shcherbachenko can set them up to defend, but he doesn't know how to get that very disparate group of players to win yet, because there are some good players in that squad. It's not a duff squad by any means. I felt they were very unlucky down at Shakhtar. Dembo Darbo finally scoring at the 36th time of asking with about 5 or 6 minutes to go. Against Ruch at halftime, I wrote on Twitter that they were a pub team. It was like watching the Faroe Islands play Germany in the first half. The gap was so enormous. And I don't know what happened to Ruch in the second half. I think they lost interest in the game, and I think they thought they'd put it to bed. It was really poor. So I think the 2 draws on paper aren't bad results for Ruch. But Olszewski already is under a little bit of pressure because Mr. Zaitsev is not famed for his patience. And I think whilst a draw against an unknown quantity in Gommel was acceptable for a largely new team in the first game, that was a really damaging result for him at FC Minsk, and he'll need to start getting wins on the board very quickly now, I feel.
I think what I found slightly strange about it was that he seemed to be resting players. I mean, he took Laptev off, he took Tway off, 2 players who'd been absolutely outstanding. I just felt, I know there's an international break coming up, so maybe he was under orders, but I just felt from a selfish point of view, why not keep them on? You know, there's no reason not to. It seemed, as you say, to be an almost slightly complacent approach from the management team as well. On the plus side, I think that first half an hour, albeit against a pub team in all respects, in terms of how they played, was highly impressive. And you just feel that maybe if they'd had a little bit more nous and a little bit more ability to manage the game a bit better, they might, well, they should obviously have gone on and won the game. And I suppose if we're trying to get the positives from their point of view from that game, they were absolutely brilliant for half an hour. Let's see how they get on when they play against stronger teams. But I have a feeling, although the weakness of the opposition really made them look even better, I do have a feeling that if they play that well against pretty much any team in the league, they are going to be very hard to stop.
I agree with you, but you've got to do it for more than half an hour. And I think the argument that the coach and the staff would say is, come on, we've just started. There's going to be setbacks. We're getting used to one another, and I'm still trying to get my ideas across. And fair enough, you can get away with that for the first month of the season. But I think come the end of April, he'll need to be hitting those levels every game. Because Mr. Zaitsev has spent a lot of money putting that team together and building up Ruch, and he just won't accept what he saw in the last 20 minutes at FC last week. So I hope for Kirill Olszewski that he's able to put a bit more of his stamp on the team and get them performing at a more consistent level, and we'll see where that takes them in the next few games after the international break.
So the only other 2 teams that have sort of been mentioned in the shaker for the top 5 here, I don't think either have been mentioned as possible title winners. Abate and Torpedo. What have you made of their starts to the season so far?
One of the games I really enjoyed, and I think you and I were kind of watching it together and commenting in Twitter together, was Bate against Sliutsk. And what I enjoyed about that game is that Sliutsk stretched Bate in a way that really they wouldn't have done last season. I remember the equivalent game in 2020 when Vitaly Pavlov was still in charge at Sliutsk, and Sliutsk went up to the Borisov Arena to park the bus and didn't offer anything. They were very disappointing. But Alexander Brazovic at Sliutsk, I think, went to Bata to give them a game and to ask questions of them. And you saw in the performance of Sergei Glebko and particularly Stephen Alfred that they've got a couple of really good players in there that they can build a team around. I thought Bata stood up well to the challenge. Obviously, Umarov scored early on, which settled them down a bit. But by half-time, they were getting really frustrated. And Sliutsk had a couple of half chances, which was more than they had in the entire game in 2020. So Bata looked okay, I think, down at Dinamo Brest, and you were raving about the atmosphere there at the weekend. They were a bit unlucky. Several good chances were passed up. But I think a lot of teams will find it difficult going down there this year. Dinamo clearly have built a siege mentality. and determined to maintain the good standing of the club despite the loss of finance. So I think Bata have done okay in the first couple of games. I think if you'd offered Zhukovsky 4 points from the first 2 games, he'd probably have taken it before the season started.
Put Torpedo in a different situation this weekend, weren't they? In the sense that Bate probably were thinking they should carry on and build on the good work. I suppose even with a trip to Brest, the kind of team that Dinamo have put together is not bad, but you'd still think Bate would expect to win that. Yeah. Whereas obviously Torpedo were left with a different situation, having been pretty roundly and soundly defeated the week before. It was a kind of recovery job for them, and I suppose they did all right, didn't they? I felt second half at Slavia they began to turn the screw, totally deserved to win the game. Took a while to break them down, but probably, again, a feeling that they probably aren't good enough to win it, but certainly, as we have felt and many others, they will be there or thereabouts.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think they weren't horrendous at Dinamo Minsk. I think Yuri Puntus came out in the portals afterwards and said that he was ashamed and he felt the team fell apart in the second half. I didn't get that sense. I thought for an hour they were really quite competitive. They'd 1 or 2 good chances, but Dinamo just stepped up a gear that they didn't have in 2020 against them in the last half hour. Down at Slavia, obviously it was a get of a day, horrible freezing day, terrible pitch. Puntus praised Slavia's ownership for getting the game on at all. And I felt, yes, they had to win ugly. They had to work very hard against a Slavia side that's still very disjointed for me and tactically a bit clueless. You know, they've got good resources at Slavia, but they're just not using them. So Torpedo can take a lot of heart from that performance. And I think even beyond that, they needed a reaction from a damaging defeat on the first day, and obviously putting a win away against an obdurate team was the perfect way to respond to that setback.
I'm very glad, John, that you mentioned the atmosphere at Brest. I do think that when we're taking into account teams that might break into the top 5 that we've already mentioned there, and I think probably I haven't seen anything. It's very early days, isn't it? We're 2 weeks into the season. There's 28 weeks to go. We probably shouldn't be talking in too much detail about anyone's chances of relegation or winning the championship. But inevitably, that's all we've got to go on. So that's what we're looking at, early impressions. Yeah. And I don't suppose that 4,000 people turn up at Brest every week. But I think in the context of a fan boycott, where clearly attendances are down because the ultras have decided they're not going to attend the games in protest at the current political situation. I just felt, like you say, that was a massive show of support for a team that has been, well, it's been taken apart, hasn't it, really, by the previous owner, and they've managed to get together a reasonable team. And I just couldn't believe that the noise. I mean, it's the biggest crowd we've seen, I think, at a game since we started watching Belarusian football. And maybe I've been starved of chanting for too long. It sounded absolutely deafening to me, and I was hugely heartened by that. And I do think in that context, if they carry on bringing in 2,000 or 3,000 at least every week, and they carry on making that noise, they're going to be a hell of a difficult side to beat. I think that their home form will be pretty awesome.
Well, I think we had them down as 6th in our pre-season preview, and I don't think that's a bad shout. I think when we started recording these podcasts in January, there was some doubt if they would begin the season at all, because we didn't see how they could get a squad together. But clearly Kowalczuk has really built this "you're not going to see the back of our football club," and he signed players who are in it not just for the money, but a belief in the project he's got down there. And I think you're right, they're going to be a very tough side. We saw how they blew away Sputnik in the first week. They had a wee bit of luck to get them underway, but they really dominated that game in the second half. And they've gone head to head with a Bata side who are still recognisable from last season and come away with a point. And Kowalczuk's strategy will be to put away the weaker sides ruthlessly and stand up to the top 5 and take as much as he can from those games. And if he can hit both those targets consistently, then I think they should be absolutely fine this season.
Must have reminded me a bit of a sort of Belarusian Mourinho on the touchline on Saturday. It was one of those where every gesticulation, look of horror at a perfectly reasonable free kick award against his side. You could just see he was absolutely living every moment of it.
There is that energy about them. It's like a club in England that's come very close to bankruptcy and have survived, and all the fans come back, or a hated chairman's been forced out, like at Charlton, and there's a new owner and everyone wants to come back. It's exactly the same energy. You can feel it.
So we feel the top six. We've not seen anything to suggest that top six isn't probably going to be the top six in the season. Or as I say, it's very, very early to make decisions. And the bottom of the table, sadly, is propped up by two of our predictable sides. But we do perhaps think that there's hope for both of them, and that maybe one or two other sides might well get sucked into that battle, if not for the actual relegation places, certainly for the relegation playoff.
I agree with you. I mean, I think both Sputnik, Rechica and Smorgon are significantly weaker than Belshina and Smolovici last year. You could argue that Sputnik have been very unlucky. The penalty that they gave away, where Pavel Sesliukovic has basically dived and conned the referee, I hate to see that. That's put them behind, and I felt they competed well against Gomel for about an hour, fell away a bit after the second goal. And of course, the first game where you had Tine Vukmanic sent off ludicrously against Dinamo Brest, and then the roof came in a bit for them. And the coach, Vyacheslav Levchuk, used this wonderful phrase in the papers on Sunday saying, one day a gingerbread truck will overturn in our street, meaning our luck will change, our day will come. So I don't think they've lost heart. Smorgon, well, they're well organised, they're hard to break down, but they've got absolutely no threat going forward. And that's disappointing for a squad with Koval, with Senkovic, Kankovic in it. So the issue is in midfield there. And I'm afraid to say they've a couple of real participation players in defence. I've no idea why they've signed Bondarenko. He was responsible for two of the goals against Energetic, arguably for Komarovsky's first goal on Friday against East Lodge. So they're a weak squad. I think the coach, Gerashichenko, this week has said, look, our task is to stay up and we don't have any more ambitions. They're playing Slavia next, and it's ridiculous and sort of Sky Sports chat to say it's a 6-pointer already, but it is a significant game. If Smorgon can get on the board, then that's going to really give them a boost to their confidence. And Slavia, for me, have looked nice in between the two penalty boxes, but rickety defensively and non-existent up front. And for me, this is down to Coach Martinovic. He's got 4 big forwards, Islam Tulupov, Nikita Melnikov, and he's got the 2 Ghanaians. Now, you're not telling me that you can't pick a decent front 2 out of those talented players and get goals out of them, but he's not been able to do that so far. And for me, this is a real problem. So Slavia have a decent squad, much better than Sputnik or Smorgon, but if they don't stop this alarming start to the season, they might well get sucked into relegation bother,
I think we should add at this point that we're big fans of Isloch, and I know there'll be a few people out there saying, "Excuse me, we've won both our games. We've got 6 points. You haven't mentioned us in the shake-up for the league title this year." I have to say the jury's still out slightly on Isloch, although I've been really encouraged by a lot of what I've seen. I just think because they played Slavia and Smorgon, we need them to play somebody who's not going to be competing guaranteed for the relegation spots. Before we can sort of say where they might end up. Obviously, if they play even a mid, I would imagine against a team like Gomel or somebody like that, we'd have a better idea as to what they might offer in terms of their top 6 potential, don't you think?
Yeah, that's going to be one of the fixtures to really look out for, and one that I'll really enjoy watching two young coaches put their sides up against one another. So Artem Radkov at Isloch and Igor Bionchik at Gomel, who people like Tatur rave about and say he's the most forward-thinking young coach in the country. So that will be a really interesting game. I think Isloch are decent. I think Radkov's got a 3-4 year project there. And I think this season's just about establishing his credentials, and he's gone a long way to do that in his first couple of games. As David Moyes knows, it's quite a thing to take over after a club legend departs. But he's put a great marker down to begin with, albeit against slightly weaker opposition. So Isloch will be comfortably mid-table, and the challenge for Radkov with the ongoing financial constraints will be to show improvement season on season beyond this one. And I think if he keeps those young boys together and holds them together as a team over 2-3 years, then they really could be something in the 23 or 24 season. I get that sense about that team.
So we agreed that there haven't been too many classics so far. We've really enjoyed the football that we've watched. Certainly, there have been some players, I think, that we wouldn't necessarily, some new faces, perhaps players we haven't noticed before that have kind of stood out in this first couple of weeks as well. I think Stephen Alford is one you've already mentioned. I've been really impressed with him, I have to say.
Yeah, big, powerful guy, never stops running. Bit of a frog in a blender type, all knees and elbows. So a nightmare to defend against, and very, very skillful on the ball. The one question mark about Stephen is he's not terribly prolific. I think he had 3 and 17 for Punic in Armenia. So we'll see what his scoring rate's like in our league. But he's someone I really enjoyed watching in the first couple of games. The other players are maybe more familiar, but who's really stood out for me in goal has been Ignatovic at FC Minsk. He was outstanding at Shakhtar. And again, a couple of crucial saves at the weekend in the game against Ruch. But we were talking just before we started recording, Liam, about Vladislav Vasiliev at Energetic and the contribution he's going to make to Vladimir Boyavsky's team this season.
Yeah, I think the thing with him is it's just a question, as usual with Energetic, he's gone there and playing for buttons. You think, well, if he carries on playing like that, and I mean, he's been absolutely outstanding the first 2 weeks, 2 assists in the first game, really nicely taken goal in the second game. You just think it comes to July, and all of a sudden, and pretty much anyone with half an inkling of trying to finish in the top 6 or win the title, we're thinking, I think we'll have him. And in fact, Rook may well decide we'll have him back. You've got no idea what sort of contract he's on there, but it will be a meager one. So yeah, unfortunately, I hope for Energetic's sake, it doesn't end up unfolding like it did last year, where they just couldn't hang on to people like Tway and Yakshiboyev because they had nothing to keep them there. They had no particular financial incentive to offer them, and so they just moved on. So I do foresee potentially another situation where Energetic, who I have to say, we both tipped them to be in the relegation playoff, didn't we? What we've seen so far, that was miserably pessimistic of us. But I do again feel there's a couple of individuals in there, Moatu and Vasiliev, the midfielder Vasiliev rather than the striker, who have been absolutely outstanding. And you think again, it's a slightly fragile situation. If things change significantly in the summer, then they may have enough points on the board to survive. Let's hope they do, because if they lose the way it's looked so far, if they lose Vasiliev in July, that will be a massive dent in their chances. And to be fair, that's what they were missing last year, wasn't it? After Tway left, they never really replaced Tway. They had no creativity in midfield, and inevitably won about 1 in the last 10, didn't they? So
yeah, I don't think we'll be the first people to underestimate Vladimir Boyavsky and Anatoly Yurevich, nor will we be the last. But it's very clear from the first couple of games that Energetic are going with their usual strategy of being super fit, super motivated and well organised, and try and get as big a score as possible on the board before the July transfer window, so that whoever leaves, it won't damage them too much in the second part of the season. The only thing about Vladislav, of course, is that he had quite a long spell at Energetic before going down to Brest, and this is actually a return to the club for him. So there's clearly a bit of an affection for the club there and the coaches and the setup. So I think if he is to leave again, and of course he might, then it'll have to be for a good offer and a good reason rather than just for more money elsewhere, as is often the case with players nowadays.
I suppose the thing with, I think Rob said the other day to me that he felt really not very happy at all that Rook had let him go at Rob at the Rook Best UK Twitter page. But I suppose the thing is, they got Savitsky, haven't they? And I suppose Savitsky is the same sort of player. He's tricky. He's ostensibly left-footed, cuts in from the right. So you can see that they've got another player who can do that and probably can do it better than Vasiliev. With all due respect to Vasiliev, so you can see the logic behind it. But I am just really surprised, having seen 2 games of him so far, not really focused on him much last year, that there wasn't one of the bigger clubs when Rook decided he accepts the requirements. One of the bigger clubs in Energetic, with all due respect, came in for him. But as you say, perhaps an affection for Energetic that kept him, that took him back there. And I mean, interestingly, probably one of the only teams we haven't mentioned so far. We mentioned in passing. Interesting that you tipped Gommel to be mid-table, and I really couldn't say anything about Gommel before the start of the season. But certainly at the moment, there'd be no suggestion that they would be anything worse than mid-table, would they? I've been very impressed with them in the first 2 games.
Yeah, and it's the only game I saw of Gommel's last season was when they were turned over by Krumkachi in a big promotion game in the Pershaya last year. But it's a really good side, and you can see that Bionchik has added very cannily in the close season, signing the boy Kostrov, the Moldovan international from Slavia Mosar, where he'd been for 5 years. I thought that was a bit of a strange signing because Kostrov is knocking on a bit at 33, but he makes that team tick, playing a little bit of the role that Khachaturian plays for Torpedo. Everything runs through him. And they've got the boy Solovey up front, who was prolific at Lokomotiv Gomel last season, who's an under-21 international from back in the day. But I can see Solovey maybe knocking on the door of the national team if he's able to maintain a prolific scoring rate in the Vysheshaya this year. And he started really well. I think they're a well-organised team, and I think the coach is tactically very flexible, so he's able to come up with game plans for all kinds of different situations. And I can just see Gommel taking over really nicely this season, perhaps finishing just behind Dinamo Brest. I think they're a wee notch ahead of East Lodge at the moment, from what I've seen. And the way that they did a number in Ruch in the first weekend was a real surprise to me, because I thought they'd just go there like Belshina, and just accept a defeat and write it off. But it wasn't like that at all.
No, interesting indeed that they seem quite ambitious. And also nice to see that we've got an FK Gommel Twitter page. It's been lovely to see that everyone's back for the new season. I don't think we've lost any of the Twitter pages that we had before. I don't know who is out there who's running the Gommel page. I joined up, I think, probably early last week, maybe, or towards the end of last week. But lovely to have somebody else on board, and I think you're going to have a really enjoyable team to watch this season. Somebody else who's obviously been with us for the first 2 weeks and was with us substantially last season was, of course, Motty's Mike. And we're now going to have some of his thoughts on what he's watched over the last year and what he's enjoyed and how it compares in some ways to what he's seen in other leagues that he covers. Motty's Mike, of course, is otherwise known as Christopher, and he will give us his thoughts now on the BPL in tandem with Dan.
Chris, thank you for joining me today.
No, thank you for having us on. It's a very much a privilege and a pleasure, so thank you.
Now, I'm not going to ask you how you got into this league. I think the conversation I ask everyone seems to have the same answer. It's like they're copying each other, like school kids are back at school. We don't need that. 2020 was a bizarre year. It brought us all into the football that was available, and it brought you along with it. Now, how have you found your time covering the Belarus league?
It's been absolutely incredible, to be honest. I never thought for 1 minute when I did get involved that things would take the turn they have. So just getting into it, like everyone else sort of just fell into what was around. And things have just gone, it's just been one step after another going forward. And it's just been absolutely incredible. It's just been like a whirlwind, I'll be honest. Getting into football in countries that I've never been to before, football I've never watched before. My basic knowledge of Belarus, I'll be honest, was Barte. That's the name that stood out because that was the team, one of the dominant forces in the 90s and the noughties. But it is a very much a learning curve as well. There's also a curve of discovery.
No, totally. And from what we were talking about before we started recording, actually, this has led you on to other leagues and other interests outside of Belarus. How's that gone?
Well, yeah. I mean, as I said, doing Belarus first few weeks of doing that was really good. So I just did doing one game a day, one on a Saturday, one on a Sunday. That took off to then doing 2 or sometimes 3 games a day. But it's also, as you say, it's spun on to other things. And so Pat McGuinness and Justin Wally, who's an Englishman, he was a coach of Matabeleland in the Canifa World Football Cup in 2018. He's now based out, and he still plays in the Latvian 3rd Division at the age of 50. Both suggested, why don't you look at Estonia? And I thought, okay. Well, I still want to do Belarus. I'm really enjoying what I'm doing. And the Estonian stuff sort of ran alongside Belarus for most of last season, to the point where I then received an email out of the blue from a chap called Raul Ojasa, who's at the time, I hadn't realised he's the editor of the Estonian FA's own football magazine called Jalka, who just went, well, we've heard what you've been doing. We've actually listened to some of your commentaries, and we're actually quite impressed with what you're doing. Do you mind if we give you some recognition? Well, am I to say no? I thought, yeah, go for it. What have we got in mind? And in the September edition of the magazine last year, there's a double-page spread featuring my little mugshot and in Estonian with the tagline, the headline of the English commentator with a different perspective of our league. And again, things are spun on from there even more. I've been doing been doing a bit of stuff from the Maltese Premier League, which offers its own challenges in itself. And quite a few people who do listen into the commentaries have actually suggested other leagues to try and have a look at. And I've actually started doing a bit of a Friday night footy where possible, covering the Swiss 2nd Division. So everything's all sort of spun on and sort of snowballed, really, all from Belarus, though. So without the Belarusian coverage, I wouldn't be doing everything else that I have done and still doing. So it's a big thank you to all that, but it's led things on.
You mentioned obviously about everything that's kind of spun off from Belarus, but let's bring it back to Belarus, because obviously that's the bit that we're particularly interested in. What would you say is the bits or the aspects of this league that stand out to you, especially as you have, as you say, focused on a number of leagues over the last year? What out of Belarus really caught your attention?
I think there's several things, really. I think, first of all, to be fair, was the way that the Belarusian FA were making the games very accessible to all and sundry. And I think that was also added to its appeal, that it was so easy to actually watch and get into the footage and see what was going on. You weren't having to don your Sherlock Holmes deerstalker and try and find things. I think the Belarus itself, to me, the impression I get is it's very much a league that's a sell-on league, a development league of sorts, looking at the likes of Yakshiboev, who's now gone to the Polish league, obviously Bojan Nastic, the Bosnian left-back with Barte last season, I think he's gone into the extra classer as well. And then, of course, Momo Yansani, who's now plying his trade in Russia. And it seems to be like, you'll see to a certain degree, you're sometimes seeing exciting young talents. And of course, you've got the sort of, say, the razzmatazz with the Belarusian league. It still feels quite new and fresh to us because we've only been into it in like a year or so. And also seeing, I'm a bit of I'll be honest, I'm a ground hopper. Do like seeing different grounds and seeing, some of the modern stuff like the National Olympic Stadium in Minsk for Dynamo, down to the throwback to halcyon days with the tractor, which takes you back to the 1970s. It's all that sort of stuff is really quite appealing to me.
Yeah, and who doesn't love a little bit of Europe up at half time? Let's face it. We're all there, aren't we? 15 minutes of dance around the bar, the front room while we're waiting for the next half. But you talked about some of the most exciting players that we've seen going by, and name check to the Yak. I was a big fan of the Yak when he was energetic, but who do you think might be the next Yakshiboev or Momo?
I'm probably going to stick my neck out a bit on this, and this might not go down with everyone. I think we've all got our own ideas and what we look for in players. I mean, one who stuck out for me, I think purely, because the way he's trying hard, his work rate and pace he's got is Stephen Alfred. I think he's one of those players very much from like the Momo Yansani mold of, I've got an opportunity to maybe showcase my talents and to maybe use this as a stepping stone to maybe propel myself forward. I think him and Demba Darbo, I don't think they've ever finished articles yet by any stretch of the imagination, but there is, I think, a bit of a rawness and like a rough edge. Like they are the proverbial archetypal cliche. They are the rough diamond that will need polishing. But I think, getting the foothold into the league where they are, it might mean that those two, I think maybe in Alfred's case, it may need a transfer to someone higher up in the Premier League or someone maybe with more extensive coaching facilities. I don't know, but probably to sort of bring them on, because we've seen Umarov, who to me, watching him in the cup and in the league game we did last weekend, seems to have come on leaps and bounds.
Who do you think's going to be there at the end of the season?
I'll be honest. At the start of the season, before the ball was kicked, I was thinking, obviously, Dynamo Minsk would definitely be up there. We know, I feel that the style of play last season at times wasn't one for the purists, and I think that's just the way Leonid Kachuk sets his side up. It's more a case of being hard to beat than going straight out and exciting attacking play. But look at the players they've taken on board this season. I think they're going to be up there. I'll be honest. I was wondering how Dynamo Brest were going to function with the change around, the revolve around there, and I've been pleasantly surprised. Whether they'll be there, I think they'll probably be on the fringes of the top four at the end of the season. I think Shakhtar will be in the mix. I was originally thinking that maybe Rook Brest on paper, when you look at the amount of Dynamo players that come over, obviously maybe things are not. But for 2 weeks in, there are some frailties there. A little bit more gelling is needed. There's been a lot of changes over the winter break, the close season. A lot of players, in some cases, some of the teams have virtually changed all their squad, and that will take time. But I say both for Dynamos. I think top four. I think both for Dynamos, Dynamo Brest, Dynamo Minsk, Shakhtar. I think Rook could be around there. I think one of the surprises maybe is seeing how Islas has got off to quite a good start. How long, will they be able to stay the pace? It's only 2 weeks in. We've got another 28 to go. So there's a lot of football still to be played. I think it's going to be a more of an open title race. I don't think it's going to be a two-horse race.
We obviously listen to you most weekends, so it's been a pleasure hearing your voice commute with me as we go through this. I'm assuming you're going to be looking at the Belarusian league going forward. How do people find you? For those that don't know you,
you can find me on social media. I'm very much on Twitter. You can find us at my tagline is Motty's Mike, which is spelled MOTTYSMIC, and that normally will have we'll be putting a lot of posters up there, just sort of promoting what games I'm doing. Or if people just want to go to the website, which is cwsportradio.com.
Thanks very much for that, you two. Fantastic stuff. Really lovely to have Motty's Mike back with us again this year. I always refer to him as Motty's Mike. He might prefer to be Paul Chris, but sorry about that, Chris, if so. Great to have you on board. Adds a huge amount to our enjoyment of the BPL, having some English commentary. So long may you stay with us. And there's a game this weekend, isn't there? Sadly, we've got no BPL action to talk about this weekend because of the international break, which I have to say I always feel a bit sad about because I don't like having a weekend without league football. But I imagine Motty's Mike will be very interested in the first Belarusian national team encounter that they face this Saturday evening, don't you think?
Well, yes, two teams very close to the man himself's heart. Belarus host Estonia in Minsk in their first World Cup qualifier for Qatar 2022. And unfortunately, the Estonian head coach, Mr. Heberli, and 15 of the first team squad are out because of exposure to a COVID-infected player in the squad. So Estonia are turning up in Minsk with a combination of a second and third 11 under the charge of Martin Reim, who is their record appearance holder and a legend of Estonian football, who was called literally last night by the president of the Estonian FA and said, "I fancy managing our national team for a couple of games." So it's a very unusual situation for them. That squad's playing the Czechs, I think, on Thursday, and then facing Belarus on Saturday. So it's a punishing schedule for a bunch of guys who barely know one another. And for the Belarusian coach, Mikhail Markel, it puts a bit more pressure on him. People are going to be looking to Belarus to win big. And then, of course, a trip to group favourites Belgium on Tuesday. And it's quite interesting because Markel has sounded quite bullish about that. He said, well, look, anything can happen. Shocks have happened before. There's no point going over there just expecting to lose. And we've got some ideas on how we're going to play. So I don't know if Alexander Gutor is going to board up the goal or something with some plywood, but I don't see how else they're going to keep Belgium out over 90 minutes. And I suspect they'll probably pack the midfield and play a 4-5-1 with Lisakovic, perhaps being charged with being a nuisance up front and feeding off whatever scraps the likes of Stasovic and Kendish can get towards him, but they're going to be under the cosh in that game and not have much of the ball.
2 words for you, John. James McFadden.
James McFadden, of course, or if you are of a Northern Ireland persuasion, every Northern Ireland performance in the last few years. So it's going to be exactly that sort of game plan, isn't it?
I think so. But, hope springs eternal. And as you say, if they get off with a decent start against, as you say, essentially a Estonian reserve side, maybe that'll give them a little bit of confidence. I mean, Lisakovic, he's dangerous. I mean, he's doing all right in the Russian league. But no, I mean, obviously the Belgian team is not ranked number 1 in the world for nothing. I don't give them much hope. Who knows?
Yeah, the thing is, Liam, they've quite a good squad. They're particularly strong in the midfield. And you've got Denis Laptev and Lisakovic as your front two. That's not a bad team. So the Belarusian national team should really be doing an awful lot better than they are at the moment. And of course, the reasons for that are complex and far too long-winded to get into in this programme.
So we will be back in 2 weeks, but we're also going to focus next time on the Pashai Liga because we believe that will be starting. Not quite sure who will be in it, but that will be starting.
This is the big question, isn't it, Liam? It's who will be in that league, how many teams will be in it. And this is one of the big problems that the association is frankly making a horlicks of at the moment, is this bizarre treatment of teams below the Vyššešaja Liga. But of course, one of the favourites for the league will be Krumkachi, who have a big following in our country. And we'll have a good look through the runners and riders for that league, which I'm looking forward to.
We're also planning before our next podcast to launch a predictions league. We have got obviously a prediction for the 1 to 16 of all teams in the BPL, where they might finish in the season. We're thinking about sort of dropping in to revisit what people had predicted every month or so. But then we thought, you know what, that isn't really very relevant because the season won't have ended at those points. So let's have something a bit more current, up to date. So we taken our inspiration from the 2 Spanish guys who run a Spanish language podcast on Belarusian football. There is a competition in Spain called the Quiniela, which essentially means predicting 15 results. And all you have to do is predict 1 for a home win, cross as a score draw, or a draw of any sort actually, and 2 for an away win. So we're going to be launching something called the Vosim Rezultatov, which literally means 8 results. It will be out on Twitter in the next few days. We'd love you to sign up and predict the games every week. If you don't take part in 1 week, it doesn't really matter, but we will again have a running total for who gets the most correct predictions over the season, and we'll give a nice big prize of some description away to one of you in November. So please get involved in that. In the meantime, take good care of yourselves. Obviously, we'll be covering the Belarus-Estonia game on Saturday, so it'd be lovely to see some of you watching that as well. I must admit, I've never seen a full Belarusian national team game, so I'm really looking forward to it, albeit against the reserves from Estonia. I'm sure you are too, John.
Absolutely. It's been 20 odd years since I've sat through a full Belarusian game, from when they played Scotland on the famous occasion when the game had to be postponed because of Princess Diana's funeral. So, and I also lived in Cardiff when they turned over Wales 2-1, which didn't go down well in Cardiff, let me tell you.
And of course, they're back in Cardiff, aren't they, in November, all being well. So that's certainly...
well, we might be there, Liam. We might meet physically and watch a game of football involving Belarus, but maybe that's at the outer edge of possibility, as to have to look too far ahead at the moment.
Indeed it is. In the meantime, anyway, we'll certainly be back in 2 weeks, and take care until then.
Good to see you again. All the best. See you next time.